It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show on the channel where I am trying to outbrew your favorite Magic channel, and I am so excited to be here doing it. This is the newest episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I give you my first take at a deck list, no testing, no metagame or anything like that. I am bringing you my version 1.0 for this list that I would be looking to either test myself, or I'm welcoming you to take my list and test it and let me know what you think. Of course, this series is about two things. One, me getting to brew decks I would never brew for myself. And two, talking down in the comments with you guys about what you think about these commanders. What are cards that I'm missing? What are cards that you love in the deck? I have loved every single piece of feedback I get in this series from you guys on these decks. Because one, it opens up great conversation about brewing decks, which I feel like we don't do often enough as a community. And two, it just brings up conversation about the game that we all love. And so I love that. Our commander today is Ezuri, Stalker of Spheres. We get a new Ezuri, Simic again, and if you couldn't guess, we're proliferating. Ezuri is, in my opinion, really always cared about proliferating, so the new one is no different. When it enters the battlefield, we can pay 3. If we do, we proliferate twice, and whenever we proliferate, we draw a card. So the first question we have to ask is, what is proliferating? We proliferate, we choose any number of permanents or players that have a counter on them, and we may add another counter of that type to that permanent or player. Now, note, it's not just our permanents, because one of the most important things about proliferating is it can be used to end the game with poison counters. If we give our opponent poison counters, we can proliferate more poison counters onto them, and that's one of the ways this deck is looking to win. Now, we said counters, and there's plenty of ways to get counters. Of course, on creatures, the most prevalent thing to put on creatures is +1/+1 counters, and believe me, this deck is trying to do that. Now, the really cool part is Planeswalkers use loyalty counters. Now, we're not going as hard into the Planeswalkers with the Ezuri as I think you probably could. I try to keep this deck pretty across the board. I want to give us 3 main ways to win the game. We have the +1/+1 counters route. We have the Planeswalker shenanigans that we can do there. And then we have the poison route. I think most of the time for this deck to win, we need to pick 2 of them and have them go off. And believe me, I've spread this out not too thin. I actually genuinely think the +1/+1 counters are kind of the main way this deck is going to win. But I think the poison and the Planeswalkers are going to be a great way for us to kind of bonus up on our strategy and kind of work together to make the game end. Here's what I'm rocking for the land base. 33 lands, we got plenty of rem, plenty of draw. I'm not too worried about it. Blue-green is an interesting color combination because we really want more basics than anything else. We have so many cards that allow us to play basics and do things like that. We're playing Mirrex here for the 1/1 that I can create with Toxic 1. I'm playing Karn's Bastion 4 and tap it to proliferate. We want to use as many of these proliferate abilities as we can because all we need to do is get 1 poison counter on each of our opponents, and we can hopefully proliferate to win the game. That way, just trying to mix them in. I'm trying the Islet here because we are playing multiple ramp spells that go get forests. So of course we have Breeding Pool. That's our main searcher off something like Misty Rainforest. But I am playing the Islet here as well, just that we have another thing to go get. Of course, it's always going to come in tapped, whereas Breeding Pool we have the choice. But I think we don't mind getting the Islet in tapped, even if we have to. I've thought about playing some of the other dual-landed things like our Snow Duel, and I think it probably could come in. You'd probably have more than enough time fetching it and never having to play it tapped straight on its own. But I do like the option that almost all of our lands are going to come in untapped, and we're going to be able to use them effectively. Getting up into our enchantments, you notice a lot of our enchantments here are going towards this +1/+1 counters round. We have a couple oddities. Branch Evolution, Hardened Scales, Doubling Season, and Simic Ascendancy all primarily care about the +1/+1 counters that we're making, although Doubling Season does double as doubling up the amount of counters that we put on a permanent we control. So it doesn't just say +1/+1 counters, like our Planeswalkers are going to come in with double loyalty and that kind of thing, but I think more often than not, we're using it for the +1/+1 counters, but of course we're going to take the obvious synergy that comes with Planeswalkers as well. Inexorable Tide, I think, is one of the most important cards in this deck once we set up. It says whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. This is great because as soon as we can get a couple counters, and even +1/+1 counters in our things, maybe a poison or counter 2 in each opponent, this is one of the things that could help us end the game by pushing our strategy forward and maybe winning the game. Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study here for some draw. I think it's absolutely insane that Rhystic Study costs more than Mystic Remora. I remember a time where Mystic Remora costed more than Rhystic Study because although Rhystic Study has been printed into absolute oblivion, It's still where it is. Not really. I mean, of course, it could always use more printings, but Mystic Reward just getting reprinted definitely has helped its cost. Simic Ascendancy, a win con for our +1/+1 counters. And never one of our +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature we control. We put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. And then, of course, that being our upkeep, we have 20 more growth counters on it. We win the game. It is a enchanted win con in the deck, since, again, +1/+1 counters is the main way we're looking to win the game. Cool part about Simic Ascendancy is, let's say we have a doubling season and Simic Ascendancy out, and we put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Well, doubling season would double that to 2. Right, going on the creature, and then doubling season would double the amount of growth counters going on to Simic Ascendancy for 4. So you can see how quickly Simic Ascendancy can win us the game, or get very close, or force our opponents to deal with it once they're out. And then Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth for some ramp. Getting up in the artifacts, this is where it gets kind of interesting. We got a big mix here. We're playing our classic mana things: Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Great Henge, because we're playing a lot of creatures, and Henge comes in and puts counters on our creatures. Playing Replicating Ring, a card I wouldn't normally play, but the cool part about Proliferate is because it gets these counters every turn, we can actually proliferate them on and get to this 8 threshold and get 8 of them a lot quicker. So I think Replicating Ring becomes even better than some of the other 3 mana rocks we have, because as soon as we start proliferating, we're going to make it pretty great. Midnight Clock, we can proliferate the counters on it to make it go off faster. But the great thing about Midnight Clock is it just resets our hand. We shuffle everything back in, everything from our graveyard and our hand back in, draw a fresh 7. And this can just rejuvenate the game for us. This can push us forward. This can get us extra things that we didn't have before. I think this really helps us as far as our strategy goes. Astral Cornucopia is not a card I thought about when I originally was putting the deck together. But I just empty searched counters into Scryfall, and I was mainly just trying to think of, man, are there these corner case cards that I'm not thinking about that would work really well? And of course, Astral Cornucopia just got that reprint in the retro artifact, so it showed up, and I was like, wait a second. We can put this down for any amount we want to, and once we start proliferating, it's going to start tapping for more and more each turn, which just makes it even better. Same thing with Everflowing Chalice, which just got a couple reprints here recently in some commander decks. Well, it comes in with a charge counter for every time it was kicked, and then it taps for a mana for each charge counter on it. But we can proliferate and put more charge counters on it. So here are these interesting mana rocks that are just going to get better the more charge counters we can put on them. Contagion Engine, a card that's going to allow us to proliferate by tapping for mana. We also have Contagion Clasp that just got a reprint in the newest commander deck. I thought about playing both, but I didn't want to push too hard into this these artifacts that only just tap to proliferate. I kind of want to get some... I really wanted to get some diversity in what we could play. Grafted Exoskeleton, a way to give a creature infect. This is going to help us get some poison counters onto people. Could also help us end the game if we have a creature big enough with all these +1/+1 counters. Grafted Exoskeleton it's an interesting card. Just got a reprint in the most recent Phyrexia deck, so should be a little bit easier to pick up for the deck. But I think it just adds another level of that to the deck. The cool part is it's an equipment, so we can just keep attaching it to more things. Now, the bad part is whenever it becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent. But I don't think we mind, because I think we want to put this on something big, let it attack and get that damage in. Ichor Gauntlet's the one card I'm kind of trying to see if it'll work in this deck. So the top part says Planeswalkers you control have 0 loyalty, proliferate, -12, take an extra turn. But I'm interested in this bottom ability. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of any kind on that permanent. So it's kind of a way to give all of our Planeswalkers the ability to proliferate, which I think it just works out, right? We already want to proliferate to begin with. But the -12 taking extra turns seems good. I wonder how often we'll actually get there. If we're proliferating a lot, probably won't take very long to get there. But the bottom ability seems interesting to me. It's kind of this inexorable tide types kind of card, but it's only on one permanent. I'm not sure. I think this card probably looks a lot better in these proliferating Planeswalker decks, where you'll get a lot more use out of that top ability than you will in this deck. But 0 to proliferate on all of our Planeswalkers probably is just going to come in handy. It's going to come in handy more than we think it will. So I think this card seems like a slam dunk, along with the Take With All from the new Phyrexia set, which we'll talk about when we get to the creatures. These both seem like slam dunks in this deck. It's just going to come down to maneuvering them right to get them in the right situation. Magistrate Scepter could be the single most important card in this deck, depending on how much we're proliferating. 4 and tap to put a charge counter on it, so we do need to do it at least once to get a charge counter on it, but then tap, remove 3 charge counters from it, take an extra turn after this one. We could see a reality where we're proliferating so much that we could take infinite turns with Magistrate Scepter. My hope is that we only need to do it enough to just get poison counters on our opponents and proliferate the win out that way. But again, this is a card that I think just it's going to help us into this proliferating to win, getting counters on our opponents and really manipulating them to make the game better. Panharmonicon is in here because a lot of our creatures proliferate when they come in, or Ezuri can proliferate when it comes in. So we only have to pay that 3 mana once, and it'll actually proliferate twice because of Panharmonicon. Actually, the way that I think about it now, we'd have to pay 3 twice. I have to double check. I actually don't know. I have to double check on that activation there. If it's the case where if you pay 3, you actually get to proliferate twice with Panharmonicon, that's great. Or worst case scenario, we'll probably have the extra mana to proliferate twice on that one. Sword of Truth and Justice. Creature gets protection from white and from blue. So be careful with protection from blue because we have a ton of blue in our deck. But it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it and then proliferate. This is great because, again, we're trying to proliferate. It's something we're trying to do, and this will help us do it. And then the Ozolith, when our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them die, or leave the battlefield, which is actually even better because then if they get exiled or things like that, it's going to come onto the Ozolith and start a combat. We can move all counters on this to a creature of our choice. This is going to help us end games as well, especially when we talk about some of these +1/+1 synergy counter strategies we have. Okay, spells. The spell lineup is going to look kind of like what you'd expect from a deck like this. We're playing a lot of ramp. Triumph of the Hordes is going to help us end the game, or it's going to set us up to proliferate out the game if need be. Expand the Sphere. This card looks kind of interesting. It can get you 2 lands from the top 6, or you can just proliferate twice for 4 mana. Seems kind of interesting. Don't know how I feel about it. I feel a lot better about something like Plane-Wide Celebration. 7 mana, choose 4. 7 mana, proliferate 4 times could end the game in the right scenario. We could just also use this to our advantage. I think Plane-Wide Celebration seems like an interesting card, and I can see so many scenarios where it works out. We're playing lots of ramp. Tezzeret's Gambit to draw 2 cards, then proliferate. 4 mana, again, that proliferates what we care about. And then Unnatural Restoration seems like a really cool card. It's kind of a regrowth with an upside. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, most of the spells we care about in this deck that are doing things for +1/+1 counters, these poison counters, are going to be creatures or permanents anyway. So Unnatural Restoration, more often than not, is going to bring back something we already care about. And then we get to proliferate on top of it. On our instance, Beast Within, Rapid Hybrid, Reality Shift, we got some removal. Psych Rift to bounce something back to our hand. Fierce Guardianship, it's a free counter. I think more often than not, it's going to help us out when Ezuri's out. Heroic Intervention for a little bit of protection. Noxus Survival can bring something, any card from our graveyard and put it on top of our library. Prologue Defreesis ain't a bad way to get 1 poison counter on everyone by drawing a card. And then Worldly Tutor are going to help us get the creatures that we need because there are some very important creatures in this deck. So let's jump into them, and then we'll talk about the couple of Planeswalkers that we picked. Bloated Contaminator. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. It has Toxic Ones, so we have a chance of getting 1 poison counter in on the person we're attacking, and then we're going to proliferate a whole board. Seems pretty good. Cankerbloom, pretty cool card here. For 1, we can sack it, get rid of an artifact, get rid of an enchantment, or proliferate. Pretty good Jack of all trades card, and I think it's going to be pretty good to help us out where we need it. Champion of Lambholt, one of our potential win cons for the deck. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt cannot block creatures you control. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter. We get some counters on this, or we have more creatures come in. We proliferate until Lambholt's 9 or 10. Then our opponents probably aren't going to be able to block our creatures. That's one of the ways for us to win the game. The other is Herald of Seeger's Dreams. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them cannot be blocked. This is one of those ways for us to win the game. Get counters on all of our creatures with some of the ways that we can. And then no one can block our creatures, and we're going to win the game that way. Of course, we would love some trample enablers as well, and we'll talk about some of those that we have. But I think this and this are great ways for us to end the game and really take advantage. Contaminant Grafter, a card that seems kind of interesting. Trample, Toxic One. Every 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to 1 or more players. Proliferates. We're probably going to proliferate once per combat. And then beginning your end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, draw a card, and we can put a land from our hand down the battlefield. Not as good. But it's a decent body that's going to help us start getting poison counters on our opponents to start the proliferating train. Defiler of Vigor, probably going to come into a lot of handy in this deck. And every time we can cast a green permanent, we pay 2 life, and that counts as one of the green pips on that card. And then whenever we cast a green permanent spell, whether we pay the 2 life or not, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. This is a great ability in this deck because once we get a +1/+1 counter in anything, we are not going to stop proliferating counters onto them. So Defiler Vigor is really important for that. Displacer Kitten. There's a couple cards in here that proliferate when they ETB, including Ezuri. So I think that's pretty useful for Displacer Kitten. The other really cool part about Displacer Kitten, this is non-land permanent, so we could blink our Planeswalkers if they get attacked down, and they're going to come back in with their normal amount of loyalty counters, or double if we have things like Doubling Season out there. So it could also play into some other really cool play lines, depending on what we have and what we have access to. This could bounce something like Spark Double, which we have in here to copy. That could it could come back in as something else. I think there's plenty of different ways with this Displacer Kitten. We're also playing Thassa to do something very similar to bounce our permanents. Evolution Stage, whenever land enters the battlefield, proliferate. That's great. We're already trying to ramp anyway, so I think this is going to help us out. Flux Channeler, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. So this is another one of those copies of this Inexorable Tide effect where we're trying to proliferate by casting spells. Forgotten Ancient plays a very similar role in this deck to Mana Gorger Hydra, where whenever a player casts a spell, we get a counter on it. Forgotten Ancient can move any number of them from itself onto other creatures at the beginning of our upkeep. Mana Gorger cannot, but these are just going to get pretty big and become hard targets for our opponents. Incubation Druid taps for mana, but if we get a +1/+1 counter on it, we get to add 3 mana of any type instead, and that should be pretty easy when we're trying to get counters on things and proliferate. Kadama the West Tree, giving all of our modified creatures trample, so as soon as they have a +1/+1 counter, they're equipped or they're enchanted, they get trample, and then whenever a modified creature we control deals damage to a player, we get a basic land out of the privilege, and that'd be great because that'll kind of ramp us out and help us. Merfolk Skydiver, not very good. It's a 2/2 for 1. It puts a counter on another creature when it comes in, but the big part is the 5 mana to proliferate. If we have lots of extra mana and we need to just proliferate to end the game, this could help us out. Phyrexian Swarmlord comes down with Infect. In the beginning of upkeep, we get a 1/1 insect with Infect for each poison counter our opponents have. This is a way for us to make some tokens and potentially help us push through for game, depending on what we have access to. And then those 1/1s are going to be things that we could put counters on and kind of take that route as well. Spark Double, again, comes down as our choice of any creature or Planeswalker in our deck, and that's pretty important. And then also that permanent is not legendary, so if it copies a Planeswalker, of course, all Planeswalkers are legendary, so we'd have to sacrifice one, but because Spark Double makes it not legendary, that's fine. And same thing, if we copy Ezuri, it's a copy of Ezuri that isn't legendary, and that's great as well. Tainted Observer, flying Toxic 1, and whenever another creature enters battlefield under control, we can pay 2 to proliferate. That's great because if Swarmlord's making us tokens, we have extra mana, we can proliferate that way. Plenty of other things we could do. And then one of the new cards that really I think makes Ezuri even better is Take With All, Inquiry, Dominus. If you would proliferate twice instead, and then for 1 and double Phyrexian Blue, removing 3 counters from other artifacts, creatures, or Planeswalker you control, we can give it indestructible, making it a lot harder to deal with, and hopefully doubling up every proliferate trigger we see. Tyrannix Rex, great big top-end beater for this deck. Trample, Toxic 4, Ward 4, Haste. Gonna get those toxic counters, get those Phyrexian, Infect counters spread out. Start getting poison counters on our opponents. Start dealing damage to our opponents. And as soon as we can get a couple counters on this, it's just going to get a lot bigger with that haste. And the Ward 4 is going to help more than we expected to at stopping our opponents from just Swords to Plowsharing or Path to Exiling our Toxic, our Tyrannic Rexes. We're trying to move it around. And then the new Vorinclex doubles the amount of counters we put on any of our permanents and halves the amount of counters we put on our that anyone were to put on our opponent's permanents. This is great because this doubles our Planeswalkers. This doubles our +1/+1 counters. I think Vorinclex does exactly what we want. Kind of Doubling Season to do. Now, Doubling Season, of course, has the top end of being able to double our tokens. For Vorinclex, instead of doubling the tokens, just halves the amount of counters that go on our opponent's things. So the cool part here is that Vorinclex does a lot of what we want the first ability of Doubling Season to do while replacing the second ability. So I kind of view them as similar cards in this deck because they're coming down with the same role. The difference is Vorinclex is a 6/6 beater that can start attacking. And as soon as we put counters on it, of course, it's just going to start beating up our opponents. And then they'll find out for our Planeswalkers here. I really went back and forth on the new Nissa and Casmina from Strixhaven that can give all our Planeswalkers other abilities, as well as throwing some more Planeswalker support in the deck. I really went back and forth on it, but I decided I think the +1/+1 counters are going to be a little bit easier to manage, so we should probably fly a little bit more into that than the Planeswalkers. But I think all three of these Planeswalkers are going to do some good for us. First, Nissa, +1 gets us a 0/1 plant. -2 puts a counter on each of our creatures. This is great because that can start us proliferating +1/+1 counters on all our creatures. And then -7, gain X life into our X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. So if we bring Nissa down in with the doubling season, or Vorinclex collects out, it doubles her to 6. We would just need to +1 her once to be able to ultimate her the next turn. So still good, although that -2 is very good as well. Teferi Master Time, the Planeswalker that will probably benefit the most from getting the counters putting on it doubled, because we get to do any of his abilities on anyone's turn, and we can activate them at instant speed. So the best part is that +1 drawing and discarding. If we're getting 2 counters instead of 1 every time we do it, we can actually technically +8 him around the table on anyone's turn. -3 gets to phase out a creature. This is great because if a creature is attacking, this just removes it from combat and any of its abilities from combat. And that -10, taking 2 extra turns after this one, is one of those ways we can extend the game and hopefully get some more advantage that way. And then the newest Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. Whenever we draw a card, we put a loyalty counter on Teferi. That's great because, again, the more counters we can put on it, the better. 0 to draw cards. That's just going to draw us a card and put a counter on it. The -2 is going to make us some tokens to get +1/+1 counters every time we draw a card. That's great because then we start getting these tokens. They're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes on. And then -12, player chooses a permanent they control, and you basically bounce everything else non-land permanent they control back shuffled back into the deck. It's going to just knock an opponent back. But I think that's one of the ways we can deal with things, and hopefully we can get up to that quickly by drawing cards and then proliferating, right? Putting more counters on our Planeswalkers. What do you guys think of Ezuri? I think this is an interesting deck. It makes me really want to start playing around with Planeswalkers and proliferating. So you're going to notice over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be trying my hand at a few Planeswalkers decks, and I'm really excited about those to see if I can make them work with Ichor Moon Gauntlet the way I want them to. So if you're interested in the Planeswalker side of things, hold fast. I've got a couple Planeswalkers lists coming. One more Phyrexian, 1 Millzy Brews this week, 1 or 2 coming next week, and then to be honest, we're done with most of the Phyrexian 1 commanders I really want to brew, and I think that's okay. We're midway through February, and we've only got just a month or two until March the Machines comes out. So we'll just be riding. I've got plenty of stuff I'm interested in brewing for you guys that I'm interested in brewing for myself. So we're going to do it. We're going to out brew your favorite Magic channel, and I cannot wait. If you like the video, drop me a like. Let me know what you think of Ezuri down in the comments. Subscribe if you want to see more brews, and I will catch you guys.